Hi, it's Dr. Parikh, and we're getting ready to start taking notes from an article. So I am using still one of the articles that we pulled up for the references. I thought it sounded fun. So for this assignment, I want you to specifically take something from the discussion section because I want to get away from taking ideas that are summaries of other people's work, which is most of the introduction. And the results, methods and results usually aren't things you discuss specifically. You're not going to share the stats on things. You're going to do more summaries of findings. And then you'll include a citation, and anyone who wants to know more can read that citation, can look up that article and read for themselves if they want to know more about the methodology. Occasionally, you might include small details about the sample. For example, if it's a very small sample, or a very large sample, you might comment on that. But for the most part, you're just going to talk about the people involved. In this case, it wasn't people, it was books that they were analyzing, children's storybooks. And they specify young children's storybooks. And talking about emotions. So I went through and I tried to kind of pull out some of the, I'll do a quick walkthrough of the discussion section. So first they start with what had happened so the first paragraph of any discussion section should be a reminder of the main purpose and rationale for the study, what they did, and what they found, which is one of the reasons I recommend starting with the abstract, then discussion. And oftentimes I actually find the discussion a little easier as a jumping in point. So they're first talking a little bit about what's happened in the past. Then they say why that's not enough, why we needed this study. Then they tell us what they did in the study. And then they tell us here in blue I have what they found in the study. We found rich variation in which emotions were portrayed and in how and when emotions were portrayed by the main character's race and ethnicity. And then it goes blah, 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 blah. Combined, our findings suggest that U.S. storybooks targeting young children provide culturally specific messages about emotion. And then this discussion, they continued, they ran a lot of different stats on this. And most articles do. Most articles are asking very complex questions, and trying to use their data to get at that information in multiple ways. Your research proposal will be very simple because that's where we are. But that's a problem for later. So I kind of highlighted the things that were most interesting to me from this discussion. And this is a very easy to access article through the library, so you can pull up a PDF for yourself if you want. Let me see, was there? Yeah. There were, down here there's a nice example of how different professional, librarians and other people can use information from this article. So in this case, so when you're doing your paraphrase writing sample, you are doing one very general main finding. And what's tough is, what I really found a little challenging was there are so many ideas in the discussion. It's too much to stick into one sentence, and yet I wasn't sure what was going to be useful. And imagining that this is the first article you've read on your topic, you might not be sure what's going to be useful either. Because remember, you want to find where there's overlap among your articles and, what stands out to you, what does seem interesting. So here is the template. There's just some I always try to include a little bit of background in templates, but what I actually recommend is that after you make your own copy, you start deleting that background as you go. It's up to you. Sometimes you'll notice if I'm feeling a little overwhelmed when I'm looking through things, I will delete that stuff for myself to help me focus in on your work. But you can always go back to the original to get it. You can always undo to reset. There's different choices. So I try to give you a little bit of notes. I've been trying to scale back and let the videos stand in to give that extra support instead of trying to make the templates a standalone document. So the first thing I want you to do is to actually copy and paste the original for where you get things. In this case, I kind of did 1.5 paragraphs because I took from in the present study down through what was highlighted here. And you can see it shows up. To me, it feels bigger on the page here, especially if we were to do it double spaced. I don't double space this because I really want to be able to see things at once to compare, but you could double space. Let's see. So, and I forgot to fix that. So as you're doing, so the first thing is just to pick what seems to be, and usually the first paragraph is going to be the best one paragraph summary of the main finding. There's often a lot of findings, so you could choose one other thing to add into it. And I've given you two examples actually of different things that you could emphasize from the same article. And I've added in a section where first I just want to see you take some notes. And this could be, I consider mine to be fairly brief, and I'm using some casual phrases like across the board. That's euphemistic. There's not an actual board involved. And I mean across racial and ethnic groups. But across the board, one thing that using more casual language can do, it can help you internalize it a little bit. And it can also help you get away from the original wordings, because it can be really challenging to figure out how to say what you need to say without using the original wordings. So having this is an in-between spot to help you pick out the main ideas, decide what you want to focus on. So then when you come down to your paraphrase, you can just focus on writing clearly, and hopefully try to avoid copying and pasting things directly from the original in your notes. You want your notes to be a little different so that when you're writing your paraphrase, you can look at your notes instead of the original. If you're struggling, you can start looking through and just bolding or highlighting, key phrases in here. Let's see. And actually, I could add US there. Fun fact, if you are writing it as an adjective, like US storybooks, which storybooks? The US storybooks. You use U period, S period. If you are talking about the United States as a place, you have to write United States out. Okay. So for the first summary, I pulled out positive emotions were more common than negative across the board. There were differences among groups, and those differences were consistent with group values. So my one-sentence paraphrase is most U.S. storybooks for young children portray more positive than negative emotions, but the specific types of emotions portrayed often vary depending on the racial and ethnic group portrayed. And then I have my citation. It is very important to always keep citations as you write, because otherwise it all seems very clear and separate in the moment when you're working on it, and then a week later, or even a day later, or for me, sometimes an hour or two later, those separations are just gone. Similarly, anytime you're copying and pasting, I strongly encourage you to use quotation marks so that you remember that it is not your original wording. With big chunks like this, it might seem more obvious that it's not your original, but if you're copying and pasting smaller sections, just as a reminder to yourself, it is so easy to accidentally mix it up, and it is a big problem. I do not try to judge whether people had intention or not to paraphrase or to plagiarize. In this class, it is your responsibility to be vigilant against accidental plagiarism. So I don't make a distinction between, I think you just forgot. I may tell you, it looks like maybe you just forgot that you had copied and pasted this. But I don't make a distinction in how I treat it. It's all just as serious to me. I want to give you an alternate. So this one pulls in ideas from both paragraphs. My next one just focuses on the first paragraph. So there's differences among groups, consistent with group values and practices. And storybooks, it seems like storybooks may be explicit teaching of emotional values to children. And as I was writing emotional values, I realized that didn't seem like quite the right phrase that they had used. So I went back and I found, they said culturally specific messages. And actually, I realize now that I changed it to cultural messages here. And the reason I didn't change it in this phrase is because I didn't want to take a whole phrase from the original, but I did want to remind myself of the keywords. I'm going to fix this here. One thing that's tough for beginning writers, beginning academic writers, or anytime you come to a new field, is it's difficult to know what is a technical term and what is something that you can say slightly different and still have the same meaning. So in this case, I think that changing from culturally specific messages to consistent with cultural messages about emotions I think that it still means the same thing. It's not my area of expertise, so I could be wrong, but I think it's probably fine. And I try to give advice to students along the way of like, no, actually that is a technical term and you have now changed the meaning. That's one of the things I'm checking for in these early assignments. So you can see in both of these there's more than 2 authors, so I use Grady et al., and that punctuation is really important. Now that we're just focusing on the paraphrase, I can zoom in a little bit. So Grady et al., period, comma. Down here I'm using it, I'm saying it slightly different. Most of your paraphrases should end with the author's name. Otherwise, it feels awkward because as you're reading, if we look up here, we see most of the citations that this author does are parenthetical. So very rarely are they using the author's name in their actual writing. Here is one case where they do with size, affect valuation theory, and then says specifically what this person is proposing. So as we look here, it's fine to have sometimes where you say these people found, but avoid saying like according to such and such and then just making a statement. If that's what you're doing, just get rid of according to and say it at the end. Most of your academic writing where you're using ideas from a source should read like this. This is called a parenthetical citation. This one is called a narrative citation. In both cases, you're going to have the year in parentheses, and your citation, if it's parenthetical at the end, is going to go before the period. So my one-sentence paraphrase, Grady et al. Found that storybooks for young children often portray emotions in ways consistent with cultural messages about emotions in the main character's racial and ethnic group. Both of these are quick drafts that I wrote up. Neither of them are super smooth. And in some ways it's more difficult because I'm trying to be very general, but that's what I want here. I want you to just make a general big picture because you can always go back to the article to get more details. And you can always make your own notes. I really recommend having printed copies of articles, but even in digital copies, you can make notes of different kinds, or you can have separate files where you remind yourself, oh, there was this interesting thing that I could go back and write about if I wanted. Citations, the author style differs a little bit based on how many authors there are, 1, 2, or 3 or more. You never ever use initials when you are citing a journal article. The one time you use initials is if you're doing a personal statement, which is incredibly rare. I did one in my dissertation, and I've seen very few in the wild. So I can't quite say never use initials, but I can say for journal articles, never ever use initials. For books, never ever use initials. So for this, you're just doing one. I just want to, and what this lets us do, and I probably should have started with the purpose. The purpose here is for you to get a little practice with the way that we write in academic style, the way that you cite things in academic style. I can check for plagiarism. I want to help you calibrate to kind of get your system to figure out what the goal is and how close you are before you start doing a lot of writing. So we start with this small writing sample, and then you'll do article notes. You get to reuse whatever you write here in your article notes, and you get to reuse your article notes material when you do your outlines, and your outlines form the framework of your paper. So the work you're doing for this assignment may well end up being in your final paper, which is cool. There's a lot of little assignments, but a lot of it rolls over from place to place. So I get to check your citation. I get to check for plagiarism, so how close, and it's not always a clear, yes, this is plagiarism, or no, it's not. It may be, this is too close to the original for comfort. So here are some ways we can make it a little more different. Sometimes I'll find people, they're just grabbing small phrases from different sentences. But if I look, anytime I can match things up from the paragraph with the original, I start to get a little nervous. Especially if, so for example, in my second one, this sentence is largely where I took information from. But I summarized it a lot, I condensed it, and I tried to say it in a different way. So I'm going to be checking. I'm also going to look at overall how formal your style is. You shouldn't have contractions. You shouldn't have phrases like across the board, where if you're not a native English speaker, or if you're from a different culture, sometimes even different cultures that use the same language use different phrases for these kinds of informal things. You want to keep it very neutral so that everybody can understand it. We also know that some people's brains just don't do as well with euphemisms. And so we want to keep it accessible for everybody. And we also want to, because it's science, we want to make sure it is very clear and precise. We don't want people wondering, like, was there a board involved? And that may seem like a silly example, but these things certainly can happen. So you want to keep that nice neutral voice. You don't have to try to force in a bunch of fancy words at this point. For now, I would just focus on using simple and clear language, making a sentence structure that makes sense. Another thing to watch for is trying to reframe one single sentence and ending up with an awkward sentence structure. Sometimes what will happen is I will see a sentence structure, it's really awkward, so I'll try to straighten it out and make it a little more direct and clear. And then once I've edited it to be clear and concise, I look back up at the paragraph and I realize that I have now created a sentence that mirrors something in the original. And that's one reason I emphasize grabbing keywords and trying to condense ideas from different parts of the paragraph. I suppose this is somewhat taking from mostly this last sentence, but this last sentence is also a summary of the entire paragraph. So I'm a little more comfortable with that. So that is the paraphrase writing sample. Take care. Bye-bye.